Chapter 9 of Betty Baird by Hamlin Weikel. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Holly Jensen. Chapter 9, Her First Reception. A month had passed since the great Latin controversy, and Betty had found school life somewhat more in accord with her old dreams. For with a roommate like Lois, and one of the older girls for a staunch supporter, as Mary Livingstone was when she had time, no girl could be utterly forlorn. However, she missed the excitement of a crowd, to which she had been accustomed in Weston, for one of the greatest charms of boarding school in her anticipations had been the chatter and hubbub and constantly changing scenes of a house full of girls of her own age. She loved people, and always liked to have them near. She could study with a room full of babbling girls, and enter into the conversation without effort, for she could talk and study in the same breath. In this respect, she and Lois were very different, and when Lois had to be alone, it fell to Betty to turn the other girls out of the room. The time for the first reception drew near, and Betty was troubled about her dress. Her deficiencies in matters of clothes had been so mercilessly exposed by Miriam and Caroline that even her unconcern was disturbed. She still wondered why it made so much difference, and seldom noticed what others wore, but she was too sensitive to expose herself unnecessarily to their criticisms. What should she wear? Miss Jane had been very firm and explicit in her direction as to when the lilac silk should be worn, and it was not to be worn for a small occasion like this. Her mother was not strenuous about such details, so Betty accepted Miss Jane, being a dressmaker, as an authority, and an authority that could not lightly be disregarded, but her soul loathed the black silk. Then there was her hair. For a discouraged moment, she almost determined not to go down to the reception, but it was only for a moment. No, she could not miss that. Nothing could make her miss her first reception at boarding school. Perhaps Cousin Elizabeth would remember to arrange it, as she once said she would. With her hair smooth and stylish like theirs, perhaps with a pompadour, she might pass the girls without much criticism. She did not express these thoughts aloud, even to Lois, because she could not bear to be pitied, but she knew that all the girls regarded the arrangement of one's hair as the criterion of smartness. The reception evening came. Fortunately, as Betty thought, Miss Payne remembered her promise to arrange her hair, but the vexed question of the dress was still unsettled. "What shall I wear?" she cried to Lois. "Why not wear that pretty violet check?" answered Lois. "But that is my Thanksgiving reception dress. I must save it for that. Miss Jane said." "Miss Jane? Who is Miss Jane?" inquired Lois. "Miss Jane! It seems so strange you don't know her. Why, she sews for us, and she is the dearest, crankiest old body in the world. Knits wash rags, here is one, when she can't do anything else, and gives them away. She made all my duds. I'd like to see her, but you must settle about your dress. Do wear the violet," insisted Lois. "Well, Mother likes me to use my own judgment in such matters, and Miss Jane will never know," added Betty, brightening, for she longed to get into that lovely brand new dress, and taking it down from the hook, she threw it on the bed, saying, "Now I must be off to Cousin Elizabeth and be made beautiful. I'll put the dress on when I come back." At the last word she flew out of the room. She returned in half an hour, looking wholly unlike herself. In a praiseworthy effort to curb the wild, wiry mop, Miss Payne had dampened it until it was several shades darker than normal, and, after much patient manipulation, had fashioned little corkscrew curls all over the pretty head. It was a strange thing, perhaps, for Miss Payne to do, but the truth was that while her feeling for good form in general was strong, she gave little thought to such details as passing styles of hair dressing. Her attention was attracted only by something much out of the ordinary. Such, in truth, was Betty's tangled mop of short hair, the only short hair in the school, and the sole alternative seemed to be to make it sleek. "Oh," breathed Lois when she saw it. "What on earth has she done to you?" "Made me beautiful, of course," answered Betty as she stepped gingerly to the mirror, afraid of disturbing the elaborate coiffure. "Murder!" she screamed, catching sight of her wondrous head and sinking on the floor in a gale of mirth. She sat there rocking back and forth, her arms clasped tight and emitting peal after peal of laughter at the fantastic image facing her in the mirror. Lois was desperate. She knotted and unknotted her handkerchief. She implored Betty to get up. She started to fan her hair. She dropped the fan and ran for a towel. She threw away the towel. At last she sank into the rocking chair with her arms dangling helplessly at her side. "Oh, I could cry!" she exclaimed. "It is almost time to go down. I could shake you for laughing. Your cousin must be crazy. Do get up. I'll mop it with this towel and fan it. We must get ready. We have only 10 minutes." Betty's only response was one of her provoking quotations, delivered with grave gesture to the image in the glass. "O cobra curled, fierce fanged fair one, draw night's curtain o'er the landscape of thy hair. I yield, I kneel, I own, I bless thy law that dooms me to despair." Lois jumped out of the chair. "Oh, get up! You'll drive me crazy. What in the world are we going to do?" "Why, I am going just as I am, of course," she replied, getting up nimbly. "But you can't go looking that way." "I can and I am. Don't you think I hate it?" she said, almost breaking down and biting her lips to keep back the tears. "But there is nothing else to do," and she added more calmly, "Now I'll slip on my dress and we'll go." "Oh, Betty, you can't go that way. You'll be the laughing stock of the place." "Cousin Elizabeth didn't laugh." "I should think she would have known better than to fix your hair that way." "Perhaps she did it to keep down my pride," said Betty, her eyes twinkling and smiles again chasing one another over her face. "But do hurry, Betty. You must let me fan it." "No, I am going this way." "Oh, you contrary girl," wailed Lois. "Why do you persist in anything so foolish?" "It is this way, Lois. I care a good deal more for Cousin Elizabeth's feelings than I do for those girls who haven't spared mine. And she was really pleased over my hair. Yes, you may look amazed, but she was, and she'll notice if I change it. You see, Lois, she didn't want me to look so wild, and she usually pays no attention to such little things anyhow. Miss Green is the one who does. Besides, I am kind of daring myself to do it." "There, I suspected pride was at the bottom of it," said Lois severely. "You are the proudest girl I ever saw. You hate to think you are afraid to go down there and have those girls laugh at you." "Come, let us go down, unless you are ashamed to walk with me." "I never desert my friends, even when they go crazy," answered Lois, nettled at Betty's perverseness. When they came to the door of the reception room, Lois discovered that she had left her handkerchief behind, and saying that she would be back in a minute or two, ran upstairs, leaving Betty alone at the door. She looked into the brilliantly lighted room, and her heart seemed to stop beating at the thought of walking its length to where Miss Payne stood. The company, though not large, included many distinguished people, for Miss Payne loved lions and knew how to cage them in her drawing room, and tonight she was unusually fortunate in having a distinguished portrait painter, several singers who were favorites with the metropolitan public, a writer of distinction, a famous Asiatic traveler, an Italian countess, and a number of prominent club women, as well as all the fashionable mothers who lived near. The room was not yet filled, and the entrance of even a young girl could not, in those first moments of social adjustment, pass unnoticed. This Betty realized only too keenly as she waited for Lois. "I can't go in," she said to herself in a whisper, clasping her cold little fingers together behind her, her white face quivering with dread as she saw the laughing, handsomely gowned figures flitting gracefully and carelessly by. "I must go, and I'll go in before Lois comes, for if I am ashamed of my own appearance, I ought not to ask her to bear it with me, after refusing her advice, too," and biting her underlip until it was crimson, she walked into the room. Her appearance was greeted with smiles, giggles, and suppressed laughter by a group of girls near the door. "Just look at Paderewski, won't you?" exclaimed Miriam. "Well, if she isn't the craziest," answered Jess, laughing and staring. Helen smiled derisively and glanced at Dorothy to see if she was laughing. Betty flushed, but she walked by them with no other sign that she heard. "She's too much for me," said Jess. "I know she's no one's fool after the way she read Virgil and keeps up in all her lessons. But to come here with corkscrew curls, like those in Godey's Ladies' Book of 1860, beats my time." "Oh, hush, Jess. Someone will hear you use slang and think us ill-bred," said Helen reprovingly. "Oh, I heard Dorothy use that only yesterday, and I thought it must be the proper caper," answered Jess with a tantalizing smile, for Dorothy was Helen's model. "Oh, look at the little darling!" exclaimed Mrs. Terry, the well-known soprano, to one of the club celebrities. "She is the quaintest picture I have seen for a long time," and she smiled on Betty, who could hardly believe that the smile was meant for her, but who instinctively smiled back and felt much better for the amenities. The color came to her cheeks, and as her hair had almost dried in the warm room, she began to appear more natural. Miss Payne greeted her with an approving nod, and Betty, knowing that her hair had not escaped the all-embracing glance she gave her, was cheered to know that it had not been a futile martyrdom. But seeing Lois seized by the Miriam set, a sense of loneliness crept over her, and she felt angry that she could not be like other girls, and stand in the happy groups, and watch the people, and talk and laugh. As she stood there, the famous painter saw her and asked Miss Payne to introduce him to that little bunch of lilacs. "Why, that is my little cousin and namesake," she answered, highly delighted, and she sent for Betty by one of the girls, who rather ungraciously delivered her message. Betty hurried over to them, and though embarrassed at the thought of speaking to the great man, for the girls had talked more about him than about anyone else, his kind, gracious manner soon put her at her ease, and without knowing it, she told the story of the lilac dress. Under the influence of those friendly, interested eyes that nothing escaped, she talked as simply and naturally as if conversing with Lois. A year later, a picture called The Lilac Gown was the chef d'oeuvre of the salon, and the fresh, girlish face looking out from it was wonderfully like Betty's. "Who is that young girl over there with the face of a miniature?" asked Mrs. Livingstone of her daughter. "I wore my hair that way when I was her age, and what a quaint dress!" "Oh, that is the brightest girl in the school, and the funniest," she answered as she went for Betty. "Oh, see Mary Livingstone's mother talking to that fright! I am surprised that Mary took her up to her, for Mrs. Livingstone is so particular," whispered Miriam to Helen Dyke. "Have you met Mrs. Livingstone?" inquired Helen. "No. Have you?" "No," said Helen regretfully. "Why, every girl in the room laughed when that guy came in," continued Miriam. "Aren't those curls hideous?" asked Jessie. "Perfectly awful," they responded. Several other girls joined the group, and the conversation waxed warm over Betty's hair and dress. "I should be ashamed to speak to her," lisped one of them. "Why, look," said Helen, "everyone is making a fuss over her." "She fixed herself that way to be conspicuous," said the sharp-tongued Miriam. "She is certainly deep," said Helen, with a determination to make friends with Betty as soon as possible. Mrs. Livingstone and Mrs. King were evidently making much of her, and laughing as if she were saying bright things. More than one girl at the Pines that night saw something more in Betty than a poor, uninteresting country girl. So Miss Jane's old-fashioned and countrified dressmaking and Miss Payne's surprising ignorance of a modern girl's hairdressing turned to Betty's favor. After the guests had gone, Miss Payne spoke a few words to Betty about the reception. "Mrs. Livingstone and Mrs. King said some very pleasant things about my namesake. I am glad I arranged your hair so becomingly," she added, stepping off and admiring the effect of the tight little curls that even yet had hardly opened, so firmly had they been glued together. "Your mother has trained you beautifully. If I had any criticism, it would be that you are apt to become excited and talk too much." Betty told Lois that her cousin had made her feel that she had been a regular firecracker, each curl going off, fizz, sputter, bang, and added, "I wish I were like you, Lois. Everything you said tonight was so sweet and appropriate." "Oh, how can you be so silly? You were the most admired girl there, the belle. No one could hold a candle to you, corkscrews and all." The reception was the turning point of the roommate's life at the school. Mary Livingstone, although older than Betty and with special friends in her own class, found her extremely interesting, the more so as they both delighted in poetry, particularly in the ballads, and vied with each other in finding new ones and committing them to memory. Jessie Bentworth told Betty in her blunt manner that it was a shame the way they had treated her, and that her own feelings had changed towards her when she found she really wasn't a boaster. She had too much delicacy to mention the unfavorable impression the country clothes had made on them, but Lois knew the cause of their prejudice, and it took her longer to feel friendly towards them than it did Betty, who found it so nice to have a friendly crowd around her that she was willing to accept their motives at their own valuation. Following the reception, everything was bright for Betty until the beginning of the following week, when she made a new enemy, and one who, for a time, materially retarded her progress in one study. Miss Leet, the teacher of mathematics, was always more or less sarcastic to those who were not thoroughly prepared for the recitation, except to Miriam, who received marked evidences of her favoritism. Betty was weak in mathematics. Study as hard as she could, she seemed to make no progress, and algebra, being Miriam's favorite study, the only one in fact in which she was not dull, she gloried in showing her superiority over Betty. It was patent to all the girls that Miss Leet took advantage of every opportunity to enable her to do this, with the not unnatural result that Betty conceived a hearty dislike for the teacher. In the algebra class, on the Monday following the reception, Miss Leet, probably actuated by Betty's triumph at the reception, showed more than ever her favoritism for Miriam and her dislike for Betty, and subjected the latter to a series of comments which exhausted her stock of sarcasm. Betty's new friends, with the well-known enthusiasm of converts, were highly indignant, and as soon as the recitation was finished, repaired to her room under Lois's leadership to hold an indignation meeting. Betty, detained downstairs for some minutes, was thoughtfully mounting the stairs when she saw Miss Leet, her head bent close to the door, listening so intently to the voices of the girls within that she had not heard Betty, who, dumbfounded, stood stock still for a moment, staring at her, then brushed unceremoniously past and walked into the room, closing the door with a slam. Miss Leet knocked at once, but not before Betty had time to say, "Eavesdropper! Do as I do!" and instantly a tableau was formed. As Miss Leet walked in, she saw 10 girls as silent as statues, standing with their heads bent as if listening, each right hand forming an ear trumpet. Without a word she turned and left the room. The girls straightened up with deep indrawn breaths and looked at each other. "Well, of all the mean, low, sneaking, contemptible things I ever heard of, that is the worst," burst out Betty, her face aflame, her eyes wide with indignation, her whole frame quivering with rage. "Oh," laughed Jess, "we have known for a good while that she was doing that, but this is the first time she has been caught." But it's outrageous!" exclaimed Betty. "I never would have believed a teacher could do such a thing." "Oh, she is in a class all by herself," said Jess, and the interrupted indignation meeting proceeded with added vigor. The numerous petty persecutions, by which Miss Leach showed to whom she attributed her severe lesson in honor, only drew the girls closer to Betty. They felt that she was persecuted for their sake, as they all had long tried to devise some plan by which Miss Leet could be apprised that her habit of listening was known to them. End of Chapter 9. Recording by Holly Jensen.